So by popular demand, we're going to be covering ETHZilla today. So yes, I do read all of your tweets and then all of your comments below. So make sure that you comment during the next video to see what topics I'll cover. So in today's video, what we're going to do is we're going to break down the company, look at their financial structures in terms of their holdings, their PIPE investors, their convertibles, and how they're doing. And then finally, we're going to look at how the market is pricing ETHZilla and then a strategy going forward. So before we get started, my name is Colin. What I do is I do fundamental analysis on companies, stocks, crypto that I believe have long-term value. Now, remember that I'm not a financial advisor, so none of this is investment or financial advice. The markets are extremely volatile. You risk losing your capital. So make sure you do your own due diligence and research before you get started. So furthermore, I have nothing to sell you. There's no fancy Telegram or Discord groups. Be careful of the scammers below in the comment section. I'm not being sponsored by anybody. The only thing that I ask is that if you like and enjoy this video, to give it a like, consider subscribing. And for those of you who are on X, please consider following me where I could tweet this stuff out a lot faster than I can make a video. So if that out of the way, let's get started. So let's backtrack a little. The company started out as 180 Life Science Corp. On July 29th, they made this announcement. They're trading on the NASDAQ under the ticker ATNF. Later on August the 18th, they rebranded to ETHZilla. The ticker changed to ETHZ. So make sure that when you see those two, we're talking about the same thing. Now, basically, they're a digital asset treasury company, Ethereum treasury company, just like BMNR, just like SBET, just like Strategy is for Bitcoin. And their whole goal is to increase that asset value per share. So that's the ETH per share. And then what they're also doing is they're taking that ETH and doing some DeFi like staking with it. So here's their most recent filing and holdings as of September 2nd. You can see right over here, they hold roughly 102,246 ETH at a value of 450 million. Now that value fluctuates based on ETH's price, so remember that. And then they have 221 million in cash and roughly 166 million shares that are outstanding today. So for those of you who've been following my video sets, I hope that you continue to learn something just as I do. Remember all of these forms that we talked about, we're going to apply them today. So the PIPE investors, the S3, which is just a filing with the SEC declaring the securities, stocks, and bonds that the company is going to sell to the public. The S1 is basically the S3, but more robust. The 8K form is announcing new major events that's happening. And then we talked about the 10Qs, which are the quarterly filings showing the company's financial and operational health. And for those of you who are new, remember that the PIPE investors are the institutional accredited investors. These are the big money that get into the earlier rounds through a private transaction buying shares of a public company. So we're going to look at the PIPE investors for ETHZilla just as we did for BMNR. This was filed with their Form S3 back on August the 22nd. You can see it right here. I'm actually going to link it below so that you can check yourself and look at the data. But if you look at the offering, they're offering 220 million. And when we break that down, it's 143 million of PIPE shares, roughly 15.5 million of pre-funded warrants. So the warrants are converted into shares at a later date. And of those pre-funded warrants, about 1.9 million have already been exercised. So keep that in mind. I'll break this down in an Excel so that you could see easier. And then you have the advisory warrants right over here, 54 million. And then the placement agents that help them get this deal done, roughly 4.1 million and about 18.8 thousand of the Maxim LLC shares. So on page 22 of this filing, you can find some further useful information. Besides the PIPE investors, you can see all the advisors down here. And when you look through them, you could summarize and take a look at all the different investors who got into those earlier rounds. A notable name right over here, as you could see, FF Consumers Growth. So that's Peter Thiel's fund, the founder's fund right over here. If you add them up, you'll see it's roughly 11 million shares. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. So here's the breakdown of the PIPE investors. As you guys know, I like to put this onto an Excel sheet so I can think clearly about the price. So the PIPE investors, the common stock, and the warrants, you could see their value right over here. The total of that 220 million that we talked about, they can exercise them roughly at $2.65. Now, these are already been exercised right over here, these pre-funded warrants, 1.9 million. So we have to subtract that from the total. It's roughly $2.65, which what we talked about earlier. And then the strategic advisors, both of the rounds, they're coming in at $2.77. The other ones are at $3.45. And then finally, the placement agents, they also got shares for helping to close this deal. So keep that in mind as we're trying to price out ETHZilla. So adding on and keeping track of all of our SEC filings, I'd like to introduce you to Schedule G. Now, what Schedule G is, it's filed by individuals or entities that own a large portion, so greater than 5% of a publicly traded company. It's a little bit different in that it's not as robust as 13D, which is exactly the same as Schedule 13G, but in 13D, all it is that these are the individuals who own a large part that's trying to influence companies. So Carl Icahn, somebody like that, would be very familiar with these filings. So for ETHZilla specifically, the 13G, you could see a major name, Peter Thiel. I don't believe that these major investors are right all the time, but I do follow where the big money is going because they're usually in on good projects earlier than we are. So Peter Thiel also invested in BMNR as well. If you don't know who he is, he was a part of the original PayPal mafia, co-CEO of Elon Musk. Later on, he founded Palantir. If you've been trading in the stock market, you hear about them every single day. He's an earlier investor into Facebook earlier, and then finally, he founded his Founders Fund. So let's take a look at that filing together. You could see that he disclosed it on August the 11th, and then we could also see what happens to share prices as well. And then you could see right over here, they talk about it, right? So he disclosed 11.6 million into ATNF. That's when they were trading under the Life Science Corp right over here, about 7.5% that day. And of course, the price skyrocketed that day. So if we come right over here and take a look at the SEC filing, the Schedule 13G with 180 Life Science Corp. Remember, it was trading under ATNF. And if we come down right over here, we could see Thiel's 13G filing right over here, where he owns 11,600,000 shares. And at that time, it was roughly 7.5%. And then a fun fact that if you didn't know already, Peter Thiel is connected to ETHZilla in a very special way. Besides being in on the earlier rounds, what he also has done to connect it to ETH is he's also funded Vitalik Buterin. So when Vitalik was in his early days, in 2014, when he was still a first-year university student at the University of Waterloo, for those of you who don't know where that is, that's just an hour west of Toronto, okay, in Canada, he actually got funded by Thiel's foundation. He funded him $100K. So in a way, if it wasn't for Thiel adding on to this, maybe we may never see ETH where it is today. So that's actually a fun fact that you may have not known. And then I thought that this was cool that ETHZilla actually posted this onto their Twitter. So before we go to the charts and analyze the price action and explain what's happening with ETHZilla, when I take a look at the Form S3, the one thing I couldn't find was any restrictions or lockup periods against the PIPE investors. So if we take a look at the date, back on July 29th, that's when they executed their agreement between the PIPE investors and the ETHZilla. On August 4th, basically the PIPE guys received their shares and pre-funded warrants at $2.65 roughly. That's the lowest here. Okay, and then on August 22nd, that's when we looked at that filing, the Form S3. The ASR stands for Automatic Shelf Registration. That's when the registration is considered filed with the SEC covering the PIPE securities. Now, remember how that works, right? The stock resale, once this is declared effective by the SEC, once it's been filed and declared effective by the SEC, the PIPE guys can legally sell their shares. Now, the one thing I couldn't find, like I said earlier, is no additional lockup. So if you found any other additional information that locks up the PIPE investors, let me know. So now that we know the news and that timeline, those different dates when Thiel invested, which was disclosed on August 11, and then also the Form S3 that was filed on August 22nd, let's take a look at how the market reacted to all of this. So here's the ETHZilla chart. If you look at August right over here, we go to August the 11th, we could see that ETHZilla traded at $3.34 when it closed, okay? Now, on that Peter Thiel's announcement, the next day, this is the Thiel premium right over here. You could see that the next day, it shot up all the way to roughly $12, $13 right over here, $12.77, and it closed at $10.35, okay? That's a huge premium right over here. It's almost 200, 300% shot up in one day. And then, of course, the next day, it continues to climb, okay? It continues to climb right over here. It climbs, and the wick shoots all the way to $17.40, 50 cents right over here, but it closed at $10.70. Now, when you take a look at that, all of the things we've been learning, talking about, at $10.70, that gave you an MNAV of roughly 6.3, 6.4. So you can bet that people are selling out of their positions as they understand the value. When the premium of the stock trading above their net asset value, above that NAV, people are going to be selling like crazy, okay? And of course, it applies to other companies as well. When the NAV stretches like that, you can bet that they're going to do their ATMs like crazy on these dates, okay? That's what BMNR, that's what's been going on with SBET and other treasury companies. Now, at its highest wick on that same day, that's when the MNAV actually crossed 10, okay? So for a lot of people who say, oh, it can never happen, it can't go above 2, 2.5, during the earlier days when the data is a little bit more opaque, and especially for those of you who are new, who are kind of getting into trading, folks who are new to trading, they don't really understand how to value these treasury companies. You can get caught buying the top and being stuck in the stock a lot. So right over here, you could see that the sell-off happened, right? It closed at $10.70. And then later on, as we approach that August the 22nd, okay, so roughly around here, this is when the PIPE investors would have unlocked if there's no further restrictions. And I couldn't find any on the S3. So leading into that, you could see that the stock continues to sell off. It continues to sell off. And then by August the 22nd, you could see that it's trading down at $3. So just on the behavior of the stock alone, I could be a little bit more confident that there is no restriction. Now, what's the cool thing is that the PIPE investors are in at $2.65. Right now, the shares closed at $2.42 as of September the 4th. So you can bet if most of the PIPE investors are not out, they're probably stuck in like everybody else is as well. So that's where we're trading at, and that's the market behavior of what's happening right now. And this is a great visual representation of what happened, right? So on August the 11th, this was the Peter Thiel's premium. And of course, the MNAV shot up really high, 6 to 10. People are starting to sell off because they're selling off. They're taking all of this gain compared to Ethereum. It's basically an arbitrage versus Ethereum, and it's a leverage play. So if you zoom out and you take a look at this month, the past month. Now, ETHZilla is down almost 30%, whereas if you've gone into ETH alone, right, ETH is actually up 16%, so trading roughly at 4,300, and at some point it was higher. So you could see, for those of you who are new, these digital asset treasury companies, if you don't understand what you're doing with them, it's very risky, it's very tricky. You have to deal with all of this MNAV, ATMs, and everything else, which can cause pressure, downward pressure on the share price. So besides their PIPE investors, that $425 million, the other financing side is actually their convertible notes. So this is a debt instrument. It's a bond, bringing their total up to $565 million. They announced this back on August the 11th. So let's take a look at those convertible notes together. So for those of you who are new, convertible notes are actually bonds. So it's a debt security. So what happens is that they're a hybrid security between a bond and also a stock option as well. The way they work is that the mechanics are you lend the company some money. What happens is that at a future date, if that stock goes up, you can convert your bond or your note into the shares, okay? So their way, you actually get the appreciation. At the same time, if the stock stays flat, remember that this is a debt that the company owes you. They simply pay you at a future date when that maturity date comes up and gives you some interest, kind of like you sticking stuff into the bank. So if we dive into the weeds and take a look at those $156 million in terms of those convertible notes, you could see they issued it on August the 8th right over here. They raised $156,250,000. These are the interest rates. They're actually getting 0% in 6 months. So the money is cheaper. Also, it's 4% annually and then 18% annually if they default on those bonds. So the maturity dates, so these are in 3 years, and MicroStrategy or Strategy uses convertible notes all the time. So you can see that there's collateral, so collateral against those bonds. And then the conversion price of those bonds is actually $3.44. So the company has some rights. They may require conversion after 6 months if, to eliminate the debt if the stock surges, okay? The holder can also redeem those bonds as well, okay? And then the conversion rate in terms of the ownership cap, it's about 20% of all the shares. And of course, resale registration is required. So these are the terms of the bonds. So why are the bonds attractive to both the companies and bond investors? Well, a couple of things. Number one is it's less dilution to shareholders. So people who own ETHZilla right now, they don't want to see that major dilution, those ATMs kicking in all the time and holding the share price down. They're also flexible because you can convert them later when the shares are higher. Now, here's the real attractor for investors. So people are wondering, why would investors go in at 4%, right? So the major thing is the downside protection. You hold on to debt, but with collateral and interest. So you get paid back that debt just in case, the stock is flat or it falls. And then also you get the upside too. So if the stock continues to surge to $5, $7, $10 like it did previously, bond investors will convert these over. So that's why it's, it signals confidence in the stock. They don't need a lot of money. They're raising debt for it. And then also, we won't get into this today, but who are the bond buyers? Well, they're basically the arbitrage desks, the hedge funds who, employ gamma trading. So we're not going to get into gamma trading today. And then institutional investors like insurance company, pension funds, where they have a mandate that they cannot go into, ETH directly. They can't buy cryptocurrencies. They can't buy stocks, whereas their mandate is to invest through bonds. So there's actually a lot of bond buyers within this market, and there's a whole different science and trading executions when it comes to bonds. We won't get into it today, but those are some of the reasons why bond investors are going into this. So as I'm recording this video on September 4th, and these numbers change all the time, the stock is down pretty bad. It's at $2.42. You can see that during the past month, it's really, derailed downwards. Like most of the Ethereum or digital asset treasury companies, everybody is down within the markets due to multiple factors. But let's look into the numbers a little bit closer. So here's ETHZilla's balance sheet as of their PR of September 2nd. Remember, they had 102,000 ETH right over here. So ETH is trading roughly at 4,400 today. So if you look at their ETH holdings, it's worth 440 million. Now, they said they had about 221 million of cash on hand, 156 million of convertible debts, which we talked about. So their net asset value is their asset minus their liabilities. You could see it's roughly 500 million. You divide that by the number of outstanding shares, 166 million shares, you get a NAV of $3.03, a NAV per share of $3.03. Now, the market is underpricing these guys right now at $2.42 as of September 4th. So you get an MNAV of 0.8. So they're actually trading below of their holdings on their balance sheet today. And then you calculate their ETH concentration per 1,000 shares. It's roughly 0.61. So we could take a look at some of those metrics and integrate them in terms of how we value the company. Now, the company did come out on August the 25th and said that they're going to be buying back $250 million. They authorized this buyback. So I want to see what the company does when they're extremely undervalued. And right now, they're already undervalued because they're only trading at 80% of what their holdings is. And then the other thing that they announced recently was they said they started staking that 100 million. They talked about this on their Twitter platform. So an approach to looking at ETHZilla right now is that you have to look at all of the competitors and wonder who is the best horse. Because, I don't have all the money in the world. You probably don't have all the money in the world to lay it all out and bet on everybody. So you have to look at the best competitor. Also consolidation. I think some consolidation is going to happen eventually because the bigger treasury companies are going to be swallowing the smaller one. Because if you look at their balance sheet, if they're only trading at 0.7, 0.6, you're getting a 30-40% discount if you buy a treasury company versus going out there and acquiring ETH. So in terms of where I am, in terms of ETHZilla right now, I don't hold any ETHZilla. But let's say if I did, I can't tell you what to do with your own money, but let's say if I did right now, they're down tremendously. At some point, I expect this buyback to kick in. And then also the other things, if the PIPE investors are still left, they're not able to sell out because they're underwater as well. So right now would not be the time to continue to sell ETHZilla if you were trapped in it. Okay, so you have to look at the comparables of the price. So let me take a look right over here. So this is Ricky's X or Twitter account right over here at Risson Bobby. He does a great job at summarizing all the companies. We all try our best to keep up with all of these digital asset treasury companies because they move so fast, the numbers are changing. So some of our calculations may be off by a little bit because we're doing different assumptions. But right over here, Bobby does a very good job at summarizing all of them. BMNR, BTCS, the Ether Machine, then ETHZilla right over here, SBET and Game and everybody else, okay? If we just focus on ETHZilla right over here on Bobby's numbers, and if we took a look at their MNAV, okay, so it's pretty close to what I calculated right now, 0.8, 0.9, you can see that they're actually being traded, they're being undervalued. You can see right over here, BT, they're actually trading less. So it's really tricky when you're trying to value these treasury companies. And for those of you who are new, I would say if you're considering taking a look at ETH versus this, I would probably stick with just the bread and butter ETH because I know ETH would do well. That's my underlying thesis. But you could see that these treasury companies are starting to become undervalued versus BMNR. And at some point, I do believe that, BMNR or SBET is going to acquire some of these companies. And right now, if I look at the peers, I think that there are better horses within this race. So I wouldn't personally go into ETHZilla, but if they start to approach the 0.7, 0.6 against what's on their balance sheet, that's when it starts looking a lot more attractive because I know that $250 million authorized share buyback, they would be adding value to the company's balance sheet by buying back their own shares at that state. So those are my thoughts on ETHZilla right now. It's a hold. It's not a buy. It's not a sell right now. I'm not personally in them. So for those of you who have been following me along, please give me some suggestions in terms of what you'd like to hear next. I hear about the Ether machine a lot. Yes, MSTR is on my radar, but that's a behemoth to cover, and it's a great thing to cover strategy. There's a lot of videos out there. And then I've been hearing some about sold treasuries, and if you have any other ideas, please leave them in the comments. I actually read the comments. I will tally them up. The most votes for the next company I'll actually cover, okay? So I'll do a new video on BMNR first, updating where we are, where we're heading, what my thoughts are, and then I'll come back to this in my next video. So thank you very much for listening and for supporting. I always really appreciate you guys, and I hope that you find something helpful and that you've learned something from my video. So I will see you next time.